So, in my continued mission to desperately try and catch up on commissioned reviews, commissioned through my Patreon, link there, it's what allows me to eat, I have now hit the first few episodes of the TV show Heroes, which is a show that I'm familiar with but never watched. The thing was that at the time that it came out, I didn't have DVR, so I wasn't really up for scheduling my life around trying to be home when something aired. I know the first season was very well regarded, and enough so that I found myself thinking, ooh, maybe I'll catch up on that on Netflix. And like, this was back in the day when I was getting Netflix. It was primarily getting things on DVD mailed to you. I still use that service, by the way. But anyways, then season 2 came out and basically nobody liked it, and then its profile steadily declined after that, and I thought, oh, well, I guess I won't bother. So I never did, and now I've seen the first 3 episodes. And the person who commissioned me might be surprised for me to say the first 3 episodes because I was only commissioned to watch the first 2. But I did something I've never done before, which was watch one more than I was commissioned to. That's never happened when I've been commissioned to see the start of a TV show before. Don't take that as necessarily a glowing recommendation, but I will. It absolutely does cop to the fact that this thing does a good job of stringing you along and making you want to find out more. I feel like it's fairly safe for me to talk about these openly because show's old. It's like 10 years old at this point, the first season, and I'm only talking about the first 3 episodes, so I think I can not worry about spoilers, really. But some of the things that make it intriguing also are part of what disinclined me to go any further, even into only the first season. And what I mean by that is, we have a pretty large cast of characters already. And there is none that is clearly at this point the main character. Which means we don't have a core focus in terms of the people involved. And while the setup is intriguing enough in terms of the mix of powers, the fact that like superheroes don't seem to be any kind of standard thing in this world as it stands, like it's something that some people have theorized about but have never found, and now there appear to be a whole bunch of them. But we're also coming into this like partway into the story in a way that is distancing in terms of most of the characters. What I mean by that is, all of the characters who we see display powers either already knew for certain that they had powers, or were suspecting that they had powers. And I couldn't tell you why any of them manifested these, when they manifested these, how long ago they manifested these, why in a couple of cases, why they thought they had powers even before they had definitive proof. I don't know. And I'm not saying you necessarily need to give that information every time you do it, but when you have this many characters with superpowers, and I can't answer those questions for any of them within the first 3 episodes, the distancing effect that has for the characters kind of counterbalances the intrigue of the overall setup a little bit. Really, the only one that I was able to connect to was the character of Hiro. And he was great. I think a big part of that is he's just infused with a heck of a lot more personality, and at the very least I have a much stronger sense of his connection to the concept of what he can do. I have a much better sense of him as a person than anybody else. That having been said, I am not comfortable enough to say definitively that he might not be leaning a bit hard on broad cultural strokes. Like, I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying, like, he seemed to have a lot of personality. I don't know enough. I'm not in a position to say, and I don't know enough to even begin to speculate on whether or not the reason he feels like he has so much personality is because he was painted with an overly broad or stereotypical brush. I honestly don't know. If someone were to make that claim, I couldn't counter it. If nobody makes that claim, it gives me a breath of relief. But it is it is kind of funny to me that the one who I latched onto the hardest and appreciated the most and felt like I actually understood as a human being was the one who barely spoke English. Go figure. The rest of them, like, some of them are interesting, but as an example, we have our indestructible cheerleader who, like, it's not like she can't be injured. She absolutely can. She just recovers from any injury, including ones that should be fatal. But her attitude towards it is really weird. And it's not necessarily unjustifiable, but, like, given that I don't know anything about you and we're not sticking with you long enough for me to get a sense of what the answer might be, it all just comes across as weird. So, like, we see her for the first time getting up on a high thing and jumping down, and it's a fall that should kill her, and then she gets back up and, like, resets her arm and all this other stuff. She's like, this is attempt number 6 or whatever. I'm like, okay, first of all, how did you figure out that you're indestructible? Why are you, like, testing it? That, like, I understand thinking, like, ooh, I wonder what I can take, but, like, you're doing stuff that's fatal, and you're very nonchalant about it. And, like, her attitude for it, I feel like I'm seeing somebody who's been coping with this for a little while already, but I'm like, what? You're already jaded by it, and as far as I know, this happened to you yesterday, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it happened a month, half a year ago. I don't freaking know. I've got so little context for any of this. Or the one who was probably the blandest, and, like, even more so than the cheerleader wasn't really bland, but I didn't really connect with the high school stuff. But there's a cop who can read minds. God, that guy was bland. Bland as hell. And he's introduced in the second episode. So even though the first episode introduces a guy who can bend space-time, a guy who has predictive powers towards the future, a guy who can fly, a guy who, who's the brother of the guy who can fly, who seems to also be able to fly, but not, like, reliably. A woman who seems to, like, have a weird evil double in the mirror, and the indestructible cheerleader, and a guy who's trying to pick up on his father's work, who was a professor theorizing about this stuff, and his father's dead, and he's looking into this stuff, so we've got that guy, even though he hasn't demonstrated any powers. And each of these characters, because they're from all over the world, a nice diversity of cast, not only of ethnicity and gender, but also of location. I do like the international feel of it. Props for that. But we've got each one of these characters, because they are not interconnected with each other. None of them really know each other, aside from the two who are brothers, which means each one of these also has their own supporting cast. This is a preposterous number of characters to drop us in the middle of and give us so little to go on. I feel like it's trying to pull what Lost did in its first season, but Lost had an inherent situation where clearly everyone is disoriented, the entire situation is weird, and these people already don't know each other. So the fact that we as an audience member don't know much about them, like, they're going to find out about each other, we as an audience are going to find out more about them. Okay, that's why we're here. This is trying to recapture that, but it's not quite clicking. I think partly because the setting is more or less a real-world setting. So I'm like, I don't understand how most of these people even relate to the world in which they exist, much less understand who they are as people. Now, I can't go so far as to say that anybody is a bad character, but I couldn't tell you more than the broadest possible strokes as to who any of these people even are. And there's some of them, the actors seem to have thought enough about them that, like, I don't doubt there is rich backstory and life and justifications for why these characters are the way they are, but I don't know what any of it is. And I think it's just too many to throw at me at the opening. Like, it's hard for me to pin down why the first season of Lost did pull me in, but this doesn't quite. Again, I think it might be the extra step that Lost took of a setting that is clearly everybody is already uprooted. Whereas here, having these people interacting with their day-to-day lives and me not knowing what any of that is like and having to extrapolate it for so many freaking people, it's asking a lot. You know what it would be like? It would be like if Lost gave us small, tiny, instead of doing full episodes that were flashback episodes for all the major characters, instead they gave us tiny snippets of everybody's flashbacks in the first episode as well. That's a bit more what Heroes feels like it's doing. But at the same time, it is kind of intriguing. There's a propellant energy to it, which I do appreciate, even though I'm having a really hard time connecting with any of these dang people. If I was going to nitpick, the other thing that I don't love, but like, part of me still expects it even today. And yeah, fine, that's definitely a thing. So, the depiction of, I mentioned the woman who seems to like have an evil reflection. Don't know what's going on there, but it's a very stereotypical depiction of a sex worker. She is down on her luck. She has a child from a husband who is no longer around, so she has a broken home. She is doing very sketchy things for money aside from just the sex work. Like, she's taken money from very skeevy people. She's, that I've just gotten exhausted, and given how many sex workers I've known in real life who are functioning, reasonable, well put together human beings, the fact that this kind of everything in your life is a mess is the standard, if not exclusive, depiction of sex work in media, I'm so over it. And even looking back at something a decade old, I'm still like, oh, for God's sake. It's exhausting. But, I don't doubt that had I started watching this at the time it aired, I probably would have stuck with it. It has that energy that works very well. And I was curious enough about, okay, but what, and I think also part of the reason why I didn't keep going after 3 episodes was, aside from the fact that I wasn't paid to, was the fact that I was starting to get the feeling that, okay, they're really gonna draw out the answers. And I may be wrong, or that may be a false assumption on my part. But if I'm right, that would have ticked me off. Because with this many characters, you could start drip feeding us answers on just one of them without having to give away the game for other characters or the overall picture. But if they were I was getting the feeling like they're going to be very stingy with giving us a lot of background or really helpful information on any of these people for a while. And I'm like, you can't. No, you got to give me something. You're trying to bait me with a hook with very little on it. There's like the whisper of a ghost of a treat on that hook. I'm not sure I'm going to bite. But I definitely get why it was a big hit in its first season. I definitely see what the appeal is. I definitely get why people hooked into it. And it hooked me well enough for 3 episodes. Not enough that I think I'm going to keep going, especially knowing that general consensus is first season's the only good one. So that's Heroes. Did you ever watch it? What were your thoughts on how it started? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I mentioned the Patreon already, so I guess I don't have to plug it again. All that stuff is a great help to me. Plus, I got links to merch and other social media stuff and all that down in the description, but no pressure. I take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break.